All right. Hello, everybody. So May, as you well know by now, is Mental Health Awareness Month. So I was planning to come on and do some live streams during the month and talk about some mental health related topics. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through one particular topic today, which is the idea of what is stress versus what is anxiety. And I'll just talk a bit about it, kind of ramble for a bit. I have a few points I want to cover for you. And so we'll go through the topic, and then afterward I can stick around and maybe answer a question or two if you guys have them. But yeah, so stress versus anxiety. And at a certain level, fear versus anxiety, we'll talk about that. But stress and anxiety are two words that are commonly used to mean the same thing. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that because there are a lot of similarities between the two. So stress, like I said, is very much related to fear. So stress is about having something in your environment, having something that you experience that causes a reaction. And that reaction is very similar to anxiety. So you can get a feeling of sort of psychological or emotional tension from it, a feeling of unease. You can also get physical symptoms from that. You can get feelings of, breathlessness, like your heart is pounding out of your chest, sweating, muscle tension. All those things that do come along with anxiety, that's also caused by stress. But stress, again, is something where you have a situation that's clearly provoking that stress. So say you have an exam coming up, or you have a first date, or, if you're like me, when you went to a dance with your, at that time, girlfriend, now wife, I always got sick to my stomach and kind of ruined things, and that was part of my stress reaction. I wasn't anxious about it, which we'll talk about, but it was a stress reaction. And I also got that way for upcoming tests or anything that was important in my life. So stress is something where there's a reaction to a real situation happening. I said that's related to fear because with fear, what you have is, again, an external stimulus, something that happens like you get held at gunpoint, or there's a natural disaster nearby or something like that, or you get chased by a dog. It could be anything, and that causes a reaction in you that, again, has a lot of similarities to anxiety, but it's fear. You're afraid of this thing, and the adaptation that happens with that, those different physical changes that you go through, the heart rate increasing, the muscle tone tightening up, all those different things that happen in your body when you have a fear reaction are there for a reason, because those are meant to keep you safe. Those are evolutionary adaptations, things to get your ass out of the way when you're about to get hit by a car, or run as fast as you can, or lift that heavy object, or whatever it takes to keep your body alive. That's what the fear is for. Now, when you talk about stress and fear versus anxiety, really the difference is that anxiety is more about the anticipation. It's about the buildup and the ominous feeling, the expectation that something's going to happen. And they are often interconnected. For instance, often you have something that is stressful for you, and the anticipation of that thing causes you anxiety, right? So maybe the first time you have a really big test, you don't do well on it, or you realize that it caused you a lot of bodily discomfort because you didn't sleep and you put yourself through the ringer, and it was a terrible experience. So the next year when finals come around, you may have a sense of anxiety about those finals, about that big test, because you know what you experienced before, you learned from that. And so the stress led to an anxious reaction. But the anxiety, the reason that's different is anxiety comes up when there isn't, it's not actively being provoked by that stimulus or by that actual thing that's happening, right? So even in a case where you have maybe a phobia, right? You have a phobia of a snake or of driving in the car or something like that. In that case, it's informed by a bad event that happened probably, or something that went on that caused you to get that anxiety. But in that moment when you feel anxious, it's not actually happening. So even if there's a snake nearby, it's not attacking you. It's not causing that sort of adaptation, that sort of reaction that's going to keep you safe. It's an unwarranted reaction. It's something that kind of has its root in the reality of what you've done in the past or your learning experiences. But in that moment, it's not exactly justified, or it's exaggerated, or it's unhelpful in some way. So that's kind of the difference. Again, anxiety, a lot of it is about, the anticipation of a future threat, or the anticipation of a future stressor, or something of that sort. And they're both very much interrelated. So like I said, for, an anxiety disorder, for instance, if you have generalized anxiety disorder or a phobia, OCD, anything like that, oftentimes you have stress, fear, and anxiety as part of that. It's all wrapped up into one ball. So maybe you have an exaggerated fear response or stress response, and you also have a tendency to become anxious about things. So they do play hand in hand. Now, when is anxiety a problem? That's one thing that's really important to ask. So when is anxiety a problem? And let me back up and say that even stress, sometimes that's a problem, sometimes it's not. There's this idea, we often use the word stress to mean one thing, but really the term is broken up into two different types of stress. There's one type of stress called eustress and one type of stress called distress. Distress you already know about, right? It's distressing, causes you discomfort, and it's inhibitory in some sort of way. Eustress is actually a positive stress. That's the stress that gets you out of bed. That's the stress that gets you into gear to actually study for that test or make you practice for your recital or whatever the case may be. Everybody has a certain arc where they need a certain amount of eustress to kind of push them along and get them motivated to stop procrastinating. My arc tends to look like this, where like right on this edge, I actually get motivated, and it takes this much stress to build up to that point. But I've gotten better about that. But yeah, so even stress has two different sides to it. It's not always bad. And anxiety is sort of similar in a way. You know, anxiety at a certain level is, again, an adaptation. It can make you really care for yourself better. And sometimes, for instance, say you live in a situation that's not safe, that's abusive in some way or unstable. At a certain point in time, anxiety is the thing that helped you be hyper aware of your surroundings, that helped you be suspicious, that helped you be worried about what's going on so that you could see the things that were threats in your environment to keep yourself safe. But then that anxiety kind of overstays its welcome, and it overextends itself and it overgeneralizes so that, you know, when you're in a board meeting and you're about to be called on, you have this huge ominous sense of foreboding, but it doesn't necessarily keep you safe the same way that anxiety used to. It's just that old skill overextending and, you know, kind of coming into play in a scenario that's not exactly relevant. So again, you know, for each of these things, I think people really get down on themselves and get really guilty and frustrated at the fact that they have anxiety, or again, you know, fear, stress, anxiety. All of these things can be part of somebody's experience. And there's this kind of second level on top where you feel anxious about something, or you feel worried or afraid of something. And then you also feel super guilty and frustrated and sometimes depressed because you're like, damn it, I'm anxious again. Why did I do this? And so you really beat yourself up about that. And one thing that I find is helpful for people to recognize is that, you know, it's just like a two sides of the same coin, where it's a superpower and it's your kryptonite, right? It's something that's going to make you more sensitive. It's going to make you more aware. It's going to make you more just taking in a lot of information from your environment. But on the flip side, it can get you into trouble when you're trying to go through a normal life where you're not constantly stressed out, where you're not feeling those anxious symptoms, and when you're, you know, trying to not be fatigued constantly, because you know, it can cause a lot of fatigue. I often think of it as people with anxiety go through life twice at once, right? You kind of process things on this layer, and then you process it on the anxious layer, and you have to kind of do both of them, which is tiring. So, you know, it's a sort of situation where you don't want to be anxious all the time, because that will wear you out. Even the physical changes in the body, there's this thing called the general adaptation syndrome, and I'm not going to go into all of that, but it's the physical changes that happen in your body that we talked about, you know, that keep you safe, all those, you know, changes that elevate things. That's not supposed to be sustainable. That's supposed to be a temporary burst. And when you do sustain that kind of low and slow over time, or even really intensely over time, that wears you out. That can make you sick. That can make you feel very tired, lower your immune system, give you GI problems, all kinds of stuff like that. So when it's a problem is when you're getting to that point. And what you want to think about is, you know, try not to judge yourself just for the fact that you have anxiety, but judge your anxiety on the impact that it's having in your life. You know, even when you're trying to reduce anxiety, like through therapy or something like that, it's not necessarily just about reducing anxiety. It's about changing the way that anxiety plays a role in your life. You're not necessarily going to get rid of it. You're not going to be unfamiliar with that sensation. But what you want to do is you want to take the wheel back. So anxiety isn't making your decisions. You're making your decisions, right? You're driving the boat or the bus or whatever metaphor you want to use. So you're just trying to limit the impact that anxiety has on you, but recognizing that it may still be a part of your experience. But, you know, when you have a problem with anxiety, whatever you want to call that, a problem, usually you want to think about, is it impacting my life in a significant way? Is it impacting my relationships with my, you know, significant other, if you have one, significant others, whatever, if it's with your family, loved ones, friends, how is it impacting your relationships? How is it impacting your work or your school or whatever your involvements are, volunteer opportunities, things of that nature? How is it impacting that? Is it causing you to have a great deal of stress, again, bringing it back to the stress, is this amount of work causing you this amount of stress because of the anxiety? And for other people in the same situation, maybe they're experiencing this amount of stress and that's okay for them. If it's having that amplifying effect and that's not treating you well, that's one thing to consider. Or maybe it's causing you to blow up at people, or be very distracted and not be able to focus on your work, working very slowly. It could have any number of effects. So again, you want to think about how is it impacting your work or your school, things of that sort. And then of course, one thing that a lot of people don't consider is just how much it sucks for you. Like, how do you feel? A lot of people come into my office for therapy and they say, well, I don't know if I should be here. I don't think that I have an anxiety disorder. I'm looking at the criteria and I don't know if I meet all of these. And I know so many people have it worse than I do and blah, blah, blah. And you kind of just got to stop and ask them, like, look, how do you feel? How does this feel to you to have this experience? And they cry and they say, it sucks and I want it to be gone. And then I say, okay, then you're in the right place, right? So that subjective feeling of how much the anxiety does not feel good. And you could substitute in anything here. We're talking about anxiety right now, but you can talk about depression or any other sort of symptom. Substitute that in and say, how much does that hurt? And if that hurts a lot, if it's really causing you a lot of internal problems, then it's worth paying attention to. And in the same vein with therapy, professional interventions, self-help even, I want to say that it's not just anxiety that needs to be intervened with. Sometimes a great deal of stress is something that's worth intervening for, or a great deal of fear about something is worth intervening. Even if it's something that's not going to be there for your entire life, during that period of that heavy stress, maybe you do need a little bit of help through that. The way that I kind of characterize it in my mind is like, similar to how grief is related to depression, right? If you're having a period of grief because you lost somebody that you love, that's going to hit you really hard, and the symptoms are going to look very similar to depression. It may or may not develop into depression over the long term, but at that time, it's a legitimate reaction, and it's causing you those same problems that it could really interfere with your life in a variety of different ways. And for some people, that grief is really, really hard to work through or take on their own. It's not that they're trying to get over this person, it's that they're trying to live their life. Again, take away the grief's power over their life. And sometimes that requires intervention. So even if somebody isn't depressed, they're just having a grief reaction, they still deserve to get some help for it. In the same way, if somebody's really, really stressed, having a hard time, and they may not be, having a social anxiety disorder or generalized anxiety disorder or whatever term you want to throw on it, maybe it still matters and it's still worth paying attention to and getting some intervention for. So that's kind of my spiel. That's what I got for you. So stress versus anxiety, just breaking it down again, stress is the reaction to something in the environment that causes that internal tension, that sense of dis-ease, at least the distress, the bad stress. Very much related to fear, which is a reaction to something bad that happens that causes you that fright and that reaction. Both of those are very similar to anxiety, but anxiety is more about the anticipation and the prediction of something bad happening in the future. So, first off, questions about any of that from you guys, or questions about anything else? I'm here for a few more minutes, so hit me with what you got and I'll do my best to answer as long as it's appropriate and within the scope of a live stream here. Thank you guys, by the way. I do appreciate you tuning in. I've seen a bunch of you pop up. It was really distracting a second ago where I was trying to focus on what I was saying, and it was like notification, 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 notification all over the screen. So if you saw me like stare off into middle space and not really speak clearly, that's what was going on. It was on like all different sides of the screen. But yeah, what questions do you got? And I should say, for anybody that's just catching it now, who are you and what do you do? That's a good question. So if you're unfamiliar with me, if you're just joining right now, my name is, my wife's sneezing like a maniac over there.
Sorry.
It happens every time. Can't control it. But my name is Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I have a doctorate in psychology. I do therapy. I'm also a self-help author. I have, obviously Facebook page and YouTube channel, and I have a podcast where I answer people's questions. And my whole shtick is basically trying to take complex psychological ideas or ideas related to mental health and just distill them down into simple, relatable terms. So just trying to translate that kind of thing. So if this is your first time joining me, thank you. I really appreciate it. And he's basically a certified BA. Well, technically I have a BS. I'm a certified BS. That's my Bachelor's of Science. Certified BSer. I'm also a professional comedian, if you haven't noticed. Yeah, but again, thank you for joining me if this is the first time. And for anybody that's just joining in now, that's already familiar with me but didn't catch the beginning part, I'll save this live stream and I'll be able to, let you guys watch this as a replay. Considering posting on YouTube as well, I'm not sure. I'll decide about that later. I'll probably cut this part out though, since I'm just rambling and talking to. It looks like I'm talking to plants. And let me turn this around. That's what I'm looking at right now. What are these? Lilacs and viburnum?
Lilacs and viburnum.
Yeah, and my bar in the background.
My bar.
No, that one's mine. That one's yours. Amy, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you enjoyed them. I'm going to scroll up. I think I saw a couple questions here. Why is it so hard to breathe when you're stressed and anxious? So we covered this a little bit, but that's part of the adaptation that happens in your body to kind of keep you safe. A lot of times basically what you're having is that it's not necessarily just hard to breathe. It's hard to breathe in a relaxing way. It's hard to breathe in the way that you normally do when you're at rest. Your body gets primed up and it's ready for action, so it's shorter breaths. And it's more like hyperventilating so that you can get quick shots of oxygen into your body. That's not very useful for when you're sitting on a couch reading a book or something like that. The other thing that anxiety does is it sort of blows up your interpretation of internal sensations. So you might start off having a little bit of trouble with your breathing, but your anxiety sort of puts a microscope up to that and says, holy crap, there's something going on here. I think you're anxious. I think you should worry. You actually might be dying. Let's like elevate this and elevate this and elevate this. And then you kind of get crushed by those symptoms. So you can have kind of a dual thing going on there where the little seedling of that feeling is similar to the thing that you're fearing, but then your anxiety just like magnifies that and blows that up. I'm sure that's something a lot of you guys have experienced. Your body is really good at sort of making these grooves and having these reactions to things. And sometimes it gets too good at that, where it says, okay, I think we're doing this. Let's just go ahead and pull the lever, and now we're having a panic attack. Let's see. Sarah, what are you saying here? Oh, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, like little feedback like that really, really helps because I certainly get plenty of reviews and things of that on my books, but not compared to the volume of people that read them. So many times I have no idea what the vast majority of people think and what their experience with it is. I don't have many panic attacks anymore, but when I do, I'm working from my PC at home, never when I'm around people. Bonnie, it's really hard to say without knowing you and being able to kind of dive into your situation. I think that a lot of times people, there's two things that can kind of happen. Sometimes there's a trigger there that's very clear, just not to you. Like there's something that is clearly triggering about that time of day, or what's happening in your body's cycle, or what happens with your vision when your eyes get fatigued or something like that just causes that, again, that internal sensation that gets amplified. But other times, there may be no really good reason, and what happens is you kind of get sent on this wild goose chase looking for that perfect trigger to explain your symptoms. And when you spend so much time and energy doing that, you aren't able to spend that time learning how to sort of put those symptoms in the background and let those be less in the front and let those stop ruling your life and instead kind of be the annoying party guest, which is sort of a parable that we often use in the field to describe, just letting those symptoms be there, but not be the most salient, most important thing that's there. Solomon, you asked, what is your main focus? Kind of broad. It's kind of broad. So like on the internet, I do a lot of this stuff, this kind of material. I take questions from listeners on my podcast. I make videos that are related to kind of self-help style mental health issues. But in like my day job, I'm actually a neuropsychologist, which means that I focus on the functioning of people's brains. So I do testing of people's memory, concentration, language abilities, all the different thinking skills, and see whether they might have a dementia condition, what the effects of their stroke were, what their effects of their brain injury were, how their schizophrenia or bipolar or borderline is affecting their thoughts. So that's kind of what I do in my day job, as well as therapy. I do regular therapy with people in person and online. So I do kind of a wide variety of things in the field. The things that I don't do are mostly I don't really have a kids focus. I worked with kids for a long time when I was in college, doing behavioral work with kids who have developmental disabilities, but I don't do a lot of that anymore. So my focus is more now like older adolescent, adult, and older adult. And to your question of, can I message you to chat sometime? I really appreciate it. The answer is no. You can send me an email that I'm happy to take on the podcast, like if you have a question that I'd like to answer. But professionally and legally, that's something that I can't do. I can't just chat with people about their issues, because that would mean that we have like a care relationship, and I could get sued for up to, I think, like $1 million+. So I ain't gonna do that. But that's the whole point of why I made my podcast, actually, is that I do get a lot of people who ask me questions, a lot of people who have concerns that want to be answered. And so I created a platform where I could, instead of answering just directly, I could turn that back out into content that could apply to a lot of different people. So if you do want to send me a question, my email is just duffthepsych@gmail.com. So the same username that you see here for Facebook, @gmail.com. And I have just a big group of questions that people send me, and most weeks, well, kind of every other week these days, I pick out 3 questions to answer. What can be the hardest part of what you do? That's a big question, Sarah. There's a lot of different hard parts, it just it depends on the circumstance. Sometimes it's really hard to not know where clients go after you're done with them, like in my day job. A lot of people I work with for quite a while, and then one day we finish together, and then they kind of go off into the void, and I never know what happens to them. Or other times, in working with an elderly population, I do have people that die, either from old age or illnesses, in rare cases from things like suicide, and that's always a little bit heavy. I tend to not really get super, I don't know what to say, like sorrowful and distressed about that particular thing. It's not the thing itself that bothers me. It's just sort of a weight sometimes that I get, where it's just, maybe I'm more irritable or more tired or something more subtle than that, and I just need a little bit of a reset. So that can be one of the things. But for me, it's so stupid, because one of the things that charges me back up is like helping people more. So that's probably why I tend to do a lot of work, is it's like, oh God, I'm feeling so worn out. I should do more stuff. That doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's just the way that it works for me. Let's see here. How about a Dr. Duff on Demand app? That's funny. Well, actually, funny that you say that. What I'm working on right now, my biggest thing, a lot of you guys have probably heard this already, but I'm working on an online course for anxiety. So basically, it's going to be, right now as it stands, it's a 10-week course. And each week there's like 3 different lessons. And for each lesson there's a video that's anywhere from 10 to 25, 30 minutes. And so I cover all these different topics. So I cover, understanding anxiety as it plays out in your body, understanding different breathing strategies and how to regulate physical anxiety, how to deal with the thoughts and sort of interpretations and assumptions, how to let go of the past so that you can move forward, how to adjust your lifestyle to better support, getting through anxiety, all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm actually working on that right now. So it's going to be something that costs about the price of actually less than one full price therapy session with me, but you get that, 10 weeks of content. And that's hopefully, the idea is to kind of make it almost an on-demand app where you're going through the same stuff that you would go through with me in, months of therapy, and instead condensed down into one sort of deal. If you are interested in checking that out, it's on my website. Just go to duffthepsych.com. There's a little course button at the top, and you can sign up for that. I'll be giving some modest discounts for the people who sign up early and things of that sort. But right now I'm in the filming phases and all of that. But it's looking really good right now. Hopefully launching in a few months here. Does the stress and anxiety over time cause chemical changes in us? God, that's a big question. Sometimes it's kind of a chicken and the egg sort of thing. We do understand that for some people there seems to be like a biological vulnerability. And when people have anxiety or depression or a variety of other issues, their brain does change in subtle ways. So it's not the sort of thing where we could say, okay, let's look at the balances of neurotransmitters in somebody's brain, which are basically just the chemicals that communicate back and forth. Let's look at the chemicals in somebody's brain and we can tell you what disorder they have. We don't have that yet. I believe that in 50 years, maybe less, probably less, we will have something like that where we can do a blood test and say, hey, you're this percentage depressed or whatever, just based on what we see there. But we don't have that right now. So there are some chemical changes that do happen, but in general, they're not permanent. So it's not like you're going to fry your brain from being anxious. And now I'm talking specifically about anxiety. There are other issues that are more profound that do stick around longer. For instance, schizophrenia. That one we do understand there's a biological component, and then when it's activated, then it tends to be a lifelong issue. For anxiety, there may be sort of a biological sensitivity to just stress and being activated in that sort of way. But being really stressed over a period of time is not going to permanently screw up your brain. For people who have, say, PTSD, that can have a prolonged effect where until they're able to break through those barriers, it has a distinct change that's kind of locked in. But in general, you're not going to fry your brain from having generalized anxiety for 15 years or something like that. Now, that does sort of bring into question the idea of there's two different types of anxiety, trait anxiety and state anxiety. State anxiety being this kind of reaction type anxiety where there's a distinct period of heightened anxiety. And then trait anxiety is more about your personality and just how you understand the world and how your worldview is sort of structured. That one tends to be more stable and enduring over time. It lasts longer, and that's part of just how you experience the world. But the state one is one that we have a whole lot more control over with sort of efforts of self-help, professional help, online courses, just saying, that sort of thing. I'm going to wrap it up here in a minute, guys. Victoria, thank you. I appreciate your comment, Victoria. You're always very, very supportive, and I really appreciate you. So thank you for that. I'll just wrap up now. Now's a good time. So thank you so much for joining me for this live stream. If you're catching this on the replay, thank you for watching. If you're new to me, definitely follow the page. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. I have a podcast called the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, which is an offshoot of my books called the Hardcore Self-Help Series. Both of my books are very affordable. They're on Kindle, they're on paperback, they're on Audible. You can find them all over the place. And just be warned, my books are a little bit more crass than I was tonight. I was a little more didactic, if you will, tonight. But the books are a little more silly, and that seems to help people out. So definitely check those out if you're interested. So thanks, and I'll see you guys for the next one. I'm going to try to do another live stream pretty soon here and do a few more over the course of this month. I may alternate between Facebook, YouTube, I don't know about Instagram, but different platforms, so make sure you're following me on everything. All right? See you guys.